should you open your spotlight caches for X-23 and the spotlights that we have this week? What decks are you going to use for X-23 starting day one? In this video, we are going to talk about whether you should open up that spotlight cache for X-23, but more importantly, look at some decks that you could use with her on day one. She's a heavy destroy card, so you're going to see a lot of those. She does have the ability to give you some extra energy when discarded. So we're going to look at least one of those. I'd love to hear from you about discard specifically in the comments below. How would you use her in discard? We're also going to share what we think is the biggest key for making sure to take advantage of X-23 throughout any of these decks. All that, our final thoughts at the end. So this is the Spotlight Cache tier list that we put together. It's got some hot debate going over on Twitter, Discord, etc. I do love engaging in those conversations. There's a lot of talk about Zabu and Ravana being too low. There's talk about X-23 being too high. There's talk about Silver Samurai being too high. That's the thing I like about these. There's so many different options on how you could put it, but there's a different video for that, so we're not going to dive in. But right now you can see that we've got X-23 in the solid range. You've got Nebula and Silk in that one as well. All of these are Series 5 cards. That's a big reason to have it in that range. So that way, if you're looking for X-23 or Silk or Nebula, you're likely to get at least 2 cards that are pretty good. Right now, Silk is a love fest from a lot of people. I wouldn't spend 6,000 tokens on her, but she's love fest. So right now, that's why this one is in the solid week, because there's 3 Series 5 cards that you could get from opening this week. And frankly, all 3 of them are pretty good. All right, so let's get to the decks. First up, we want to give a shout out to Marvel Snap Zone. They've got a great tool. I mention this every time I do these sort of deck videos. Deck Builder, it's great for theory crafting. You get stuff, you can dump it in there. I'd love to see a couple more things on this, or I'm trying to poke them about, see if they could add them. But all in all, I think it is a great tool. I highly recommend going over to this website and checking it out. All right, so the first one we've got here is sort of a Deadpool shell. My thought here is, look, you're going to want to play Deadpool and Null probably on turn 6. So ideally, you get that X-23 destroyed on, say, like turn 5, and you can still play Null and Deadpool on that final turn, potentially still with Death. You've got all of your typical destroy cards in here with Carnage, Venom, Killmonger, and Deathlock. I'm not looking at Destroyer in this deck yet. You're also looking at Nova, Forge, and Hulkbuster to potentially build up that Deadpool. And it really is all about that Deadpool. You really want to get that thing built up to build into your Null. Oh yeah, you also have Shuri, which could potentially double something. So there's a lot of decent stuff in here that you can build up. Death is going to come potentially for free by the end of this. I think this is a generally pretty simple deck as far as Destroy goes. Some alternate cards that you might want to consider putting in here if you don't like maybe too much Shuri or too much, building up of the cards. If you don't want too much of that, you could get America Chavez into thin, Magic to extend the game. Anytime you've got Death and Killmonger, Squirrel Girl is going to be an option. And also Daken. I think Daken is another option here if you want to say maybe get rid of Deathlock. You feel like you've got too many destroys in here and you want Daken in there. Well, you've got a lot of destroys for 1 cards too. So that Muramasa shard should easily get destroyed. Next up, we've got XDestroyeRod. This one we leaned into the Nimrod type build. Obviously, you're going to have Shuri, Hulkbuster, Forge again to potentially pump up points. We still have Deadpool in this one. I think he's still a nice card to get some destroys on early. It's going to build the points for a potential Null. And again, if X-23 is getting used and destroyed early, then that Destroyer can come out early on turn 5 because Nimrod came out on turn 4. Even without a Shuri, that's still pretty good. And then you could potentially drop Null on turn 6. You've got your, again, typical Destroy cards here. Carnage, Killmonger, Deathlock, Venom. You add Destroyer in this one. I think this is pretty simple. I think there's multiple lines you could potentially go through here. Again, just make sure that you're understanding when to use your Destroy cards on X-23 in certain lanes. Alts for this one, again, I think America Chavez is a good one to potentially thin. I would also consider Galactus in this one, maybe again for either Forge, Shuri, or Hulkbuster. If you feel like you've got too many point buildup cards, a Galactus in this deck could be really, really good. And honestly, Forge into Galactus is a lot of fun, so that's not so bad either. So maybe you want to drop, say, a Shuri and use Galactus instead. And then I think you could consider maybe a Thanos or a Death as well. Anytime I've got Thanos, I also like to have Death in there because the potential of killing all those stones. I'm actually pretty excited to do this one because I've really enjoyed playing with Nimrod and getting them built up, especially with that Shuri and sometimes that late combo with Carnage and Venom. Okay, now don't click off the video because I have Shauna in one of these decks. I understand she's still terrible, but you know what? I wanted to try to put her in a deck that I'm calling Death to the One. Concept here is you've got a bunch of ones and you want to kill them because you want death cheap. Also, you want to build up a null. So that's really nice. Also, you've got Zola in here to potentially use on 5 because you've got X-23 getting destroyed on 4, and then use Zola that null on turn 6. I think that could help you a lot. We also have added magic to this one to potentially extend if need be. You've got to be careful with this though, because again, I don't like Shauna typically. I would not play her unless I already had Killmonger in hand. And you want to make sure that that Killmonger has got a spot that it could play to. So don't fill up 2 lanes and then have 1 lane he can play in, because what if Shauna drops a Ebony Maul in that 1 lane you were planning to play on, and then you're done? You can't do anything. So you've got to be careful with that, but it gives you the opportunity to definitely get more damage on the board, get a free death. I think it's something that could be really, really solid. Now, again, you've got your Carnage, Deathlock, Venom, as well as I mentioned Killmonger. Squirrel Girl is going to put a bunch more ones on the board. X-23 and Deadpool for the additional ones to keep killing and keep building up. And then we mentioned the rest of the cards. I think this one could be pretty interesting. I'd be very curious to see how big this could get on the board, but anytime you're using Null and then an Arnim Zola later, it's not a bad thing. And honestly, by the time you get to that, Death should be free if she's in hand. Okay, so we said we were going to have a discard. I will be up front. I struggled a little bit with the discard concept of this. I even asked on Twitter, I was like, hey, for all you discard players out there, how are you feeling about X-23? And anybody who's watching this who's a discard player, I'd love to hear your comments below. I play a bit of discard. I'm not a ton of discard, but I was just sitting here thinking going, I don't know how much I'd want her in a discard deck because it's really pretty limited to when you can do it. And is it going to give you any advantage that you really need? Obviously, always want to get extra energy, but I'm not certain you need it. A lot of times with a deck like this, you've got your line, you play it, you're good. In this one, obviously, we've got X-23. We've also got Swarm because we're leaning into the Swarm, Dracula, MODOK, APOC play line, which, again, you can do different things, but I wanted to go that route. You've got Colleen Wing to potentially kill X-23. And you also have Absorbing Man, who we'll mention now, to copy off of that Colleen Wing so that it can also, if she does X-23, and you still need those swarms, you could do Absorbing Man. Well, you don't have to do that because you might have MODOK who could take care of those swarms later. Or you can Absorbing Man those swarms, and then MODOK can get the double swarms later, and so it starts rolling, right? So that's where the Absorbing Man in this can actually be pretty good. I've got Morbius, obviously, because anytime you're discording, you're gonna have Morbius. Storm to help with Morbius, or Dracula. Obviously, you want to put Storm on 3. You could either do Morbius or Dracula in that location. Daken, because I think he's another decent card that's going to have that 1 Muramasa shard go into your hand. You're going to have MODOK to potentially use it. If you don't have MODOK, again, you could potentially Colleen Wing that shard to make him a little bit bigger. Lady Sif, because you've got APOC in hand. That's going to always discard him, and it's going to help him get bigger. You could also Absorbing Man your Lady Sif. So again, I feel like Absorbing Man fits really, really well into this deck. You could even MODOK on 5 and Absorbing Man on 6. He copies cards really, really well in this deck. It feels really good to have him in here. And again, you got the Dracula, like I mentioned, to get whatever the APOC is late, potentially the AC if you don't have it. And you're guaranteed to get that America Chavez late, so it's going to be a nice deck thinning opportunity. I think this discard deck could be decent. I'm actually went from being like, oh, gosh, how am I going to use X-23 in a discard deck, to being like, well, you know what? Maybe this could help a little bit if I get her cut up on maybe, I don't know, turn 2. And then, so I've got an extra energy on 3. So maybe I'm playing my Absorbing Man to cut up the Swarm. Or maybe I use Colleen Wing on 3 and I've got 5 energy on turn 4 and I'm using Dracula and Morbius. So it's kind of like, okay. I mean, look, the options are there. I don't know if I love them. Again, I'm going to say that. I'm not sure I love them, but I think it's worth exploring. I think this deck in general is good. You could just drop X-23 and put a different card in here like Wolverine and just be like, no, this is just what my deck is, or Nebula. And I think it'd be fine. And speaking of those alternate cards, I think Nebula is obviously one of the top ones I would consider. If you're not going to use Nebula, you might want to consider maybe Killmonger. He's a good tech card. Also with X-23 if you want to play her, and or that Daken Muramasa shard, you can throw out the Killmonger to make sure both of those go down. That's also another decent option. All right, back to Destroy. We wanted to make a deck that felt a little bit more into the Zola realm. Again, I know we mentioned him a little bit earlier, but this one I wanted to go a little bit heavier into that. call it X Zola Bae for no good reason, really. So Yondu to help build up the null, X-23, because that's the feature card we're talking about. The destroy cards, again, we've got Carnage, Venom, Killmonger, Deathlock. They're there. We need them there to help destroy. We've got Daken in this because Daken also can play pretty decent with Arnim Zola, depending if you can get extra energy early, right? You Arnim Zola that Daken on turn 5, and then you find a way to kill things on turn 6. So if you Daken, you've got a Killmonger and 3 shards. That's a lot of points for 2 Dakens. Double, double, double. Yeah, I mean, that's really good. So Daken plays really well with Zola, but again, if you're going to do that, make sure that you have that Killmonger in hand and that you could potentially use it late to kill all 3 of those shards. We've already mentioned Venom, Killmonger, and Deathlock. They obviously do what they're going to do. We've got Shang-Chi on this. Great tech card, obviously, also helps build up that null. Black Panther is just another good card to have with Arnim Zola, and if you use that, for some reason you're getting energy earlier because you're able to destroy with X-23, you could potentially get some of that back with the null as well. And then finally, because of some of the kills, you got Death. Now, I think Death could be something you bring out here, because if you're really looking at this, it's like Yondu, X-23 a couple times, some shards maybe, some Shang-Chi's. You know, it might be too late by the time you Zola something to play the Death. I'd understand that. So the other alternates I'd look at here is potentially Magic to maybe get some extended turns here. Yes, X-23 can help there, but Magic gives a nice backup plan to that. And then maybe Thanos, because he just does so much with those stones, move things around. Maybe X-23 goes in a lane you don't want it to. Play a Space Stone, move it there, then you Carnage that lane. It's like, okay, that worked out well. A lot of different options here. So I wanted, again, lean into Zola this one. Now, last but not least, I'm going with my Daken She-Death one. Now, it's now X-Daken She-Death. I really, really like this deck. The only thing that is different in this deck than the one I had previously is X-23 goes where I had Bucky. And honestly, Bucky's a card that you can put in any of these destroy decks. But the idea here is you've got a number of ones that you could potentially Killmonger. You've got other cards that you could destroy to get to hopefully a pretty cheap and or free death. But also you've got Moon Girl, She-Hulk, and the Infinite to play off of that magic play. Always got to be careful of that with Legion Storm, etc., Scarlet Witch. But when that hits and you go to a turn 7 and you're able to skip that turn 6, you get double She-Hulks, an Infinite play on turn 7. It's pretty sick. And honestly, if you can double up She-Hulk and double up Death and play the Infinite, that's when it's just GG's, just forget about it. Obviously, you also get countered with anything besides the location change with a Wave or a Sandman, but that is sort of what it is. I've really been enjoying playing this deck a lot. I was playing it exclusively until I went back to a negative Surfer Scroll deck once Crystal got her change, because I'm just really liking that one right now. But this is one of my favorite decks to play right now. I wanted to end with this one because it's been a ton of fun. Again, with the caveat, you got to be really careful against people who might be able to change that magic location, but it is a top tier deck and I get a good feel for when things are happening, so I'll know when I'm going to win or lose. And again, X-23 in this, the way you're really looking to use her, again, just get destroyed, potentially bring in cards earlier, potentially give you an opportunity. Maybe those She-Hulks were 1 energy. And so you need that energy late. Who knows? Now, if you're trying to do that on turn 6, that means you're not going to be able to play the Infinite on turn 7. But I think X-23, what you really want to potentially do with her is maybe try to get that Moon Girl out a little bit early, because that can get a little clunky because you're going to want to magic at some point when you magic, etc., etc. So I like this deck a lot. Again, highly recommend checking it out. You know, we mentioned a lot of alts through this. I appreciate you guys making it this far, and I wanted to mention in general, look, anytime you've got a destroy deck, you could do Nova, you could do Bucky, you could do Yondu, potentially do Electro. I mean, can you find a way to do X-23 and Electro? That could get sick. Honestly, I think he could be awesome with X-23. I mean, I just think about ways to try to find him in one of these. Think about that. So you X-23 on 1, you Carnage on 2, you Electro and Yondu on 3. On 4, I don't know, maybe you just Deathlock. It's a loss of 1 power or 1 energy that you're not using, but you now have a whole bunch of energy going that you've got a bunch of cards already destroyed by that turn 4. And you're feeling pretty good about that. And you've got 2 extra energy going into the 5. So you're what, playing 6, 7? And then you've always going to have that Electro every time. So that can be a lot of fun. And that is a tip that I definitely wanted to say towards the end of the video for anybody who stuck around, so thank you. And again, anytime you have the Death Killmonger, I think I had Death and Killmonger in a number of these. I think that you could obviously do Squirrel Girl. I think she's just absolutely to be considered. So let's get to the biggest key and our final thoughts. So with X-23, let's do the biggest key thing here. Don't get sucked into making sure you destroy her every turn. Make sure that you can destroy her on the critical turn that you need. I would highly suggest that turn be turn 4, so that on turn 5, you can use a 6-cost card, say a null. And then on turn 6, you can Zola that null. Now, again, it depends on the deck, but even at that point, that's not a bad use. Now, is Psylocke better? Is she doing the same thing? Yeah, I suppose. But in a destroy deck, she's like a Psylocke that's already on the board that you played early, and you're just sort of bouncing around and building up nulls and taking your death down as far as how much it cost. So I think she's a little bit better in that regard, potentially going to give you the opportunity to reach a lane that maybe you couldn't get to before. So that biggest key, make sure that you know and focus in on when you want to destroy her on what turn. And in that regard, I'd say the second biggest key is you got to be smart about when you play your destroy cards. And I get that you can't always get them in the same order, but if possible, you really want to use your Carnage and or Deathlock early and save the Killmonger and Venoms for late. Because if you have to Carnage or Deathlock a lane that's got a Daken in it, because that's where X-23 went, that's going to feel pretty bad because you're like, oh, great. Now I'm wasting my Daken here and I'm not going to get anything other than something for null and or, you know, a cost reduction in death. Not the worst thing in the world, but it's not ideal. So try to be wise about when you're using what destroy card as far as early versus late. So my final thoughts on this, look, everybody loves extra energy, no doubt about it. I think discard, I mentioned this earlier, might be tough, especially prior to Silver Samurai. I think he might help maybe a little bit, we'll see. So I think generally speaking, she's mostly going to be in destroy, which I think makes sense. And I think that's probably going to be the most fun and the spots you're going to get the most advantage out of her from. But also you got to remember, once destroy becomes too much of the meta, if too many people start doing it, it gets easily brought back down to earth with Cosmo and armor. So is this going to take things over? No, I don't necessarily think so. Is X-23 cool with the energy? Yes, that always helps. But again, I think it's going to be critical to save those cards like I mentioned with Venom and Killmonger for late so that you can get into that turn 5 extra energy. All in all, I think if X-23 had weaker cards in the spotlight, I would quickly bring that one back down. I like her. I think it's cool to have extra energy. I think she's closer to Lady Deathstrike than potentially what Silver Samurai is. Don't come shooting the messenger. Oh, I guess it's my thought, so I'm not just a messenger. Okay, you can shoot me if you want. But I do think that while she's going to bring extra energy, I think the RNG of not just where she goes, but what you have in your hand, all that sort of thing, armor cosmos, I think it could be tough. And she's extremely niche. Again, we talked about that one discard deck that we put in. I'd love to hear from you what discards you might have, but I think it might be tough to find good spots for her. Either way, I'm excited to use her. I'm definitely going to open a spotlight for her. I got to do it. I got to play around. I only need her from that whole spotlight. I do have some series 4 and 5 cards I could still use, but I'm expecting to probably need to pull all 4 for her because I got Lady Deathstrike in 1. So is what it is. Appreciate you making this far. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please consider hammering down that like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, we absolutely appreciate doing that. We've noticed that 70% of our watchers actually weren't subscribed. So we're like, we should start asking people to subscribe. So if it's been helpful, please consider it. If you want to do anything else to further help support the channel, we've got Patreons, we've got join on YouTube, we got Discords. Just come hang out. We got Twitter. Love chatting. We love Marvel Snap. We think it's a really fun game. I think the discourse of talking about what decks work, which ones don't, all that sort of thing is a lot of fun. So thanks for watching the video. And until next time, we hope you have a wonderful day.